And Bruce and I were given our marching orders by Steven Spielberg, who said, it has to be about real guys, right? Real veterans, actual men. There can't be a lot of exposition in a miniseries. That is, we can't spend a lot of time telling you why you're going to a particular battlefield, why it's important. Because this isn't a documentary. In a documentary, this is all part of the documentary. Have talking heads come on and explain this and that and the other thing. Exposition in a feature film is called boring. So you have to come up with a narrative thread that will just grab a hold of you and take you on this journey. And that is the trick of it. The other and last directive that we had from on high was that, of course, it had to be representative of the war in the Pacific. This vast ocean of enmity, very complex war. All of our service branches were deeply engaged. All of them had important battles that had everything to do with the outcome of the war, and you just can't cover it all. Particularly when you can't, of course, have a talking head to explain how all these things fit together, all these different moving pieces over a number of years. And the wonderful thing about Band of Brothers, this HBO series about the war in Europe, is that it takes you from a very linear sense of landing on the beaches and going through the war. So if you or your father or grandfather served in the ETO, you would see some part of his experience, or her experience for that matter, the nurses and so forth, of the campaign against Adolf Hitler. We wanted to try to do that in the Pacific. We wanted it to be representative, but knowing that there would be so much that would not be able to be included. It was Bruce McKenna who found this sort of starting point, the backbone of our Pacific miniseries. He had asked me for a reading list of books. He's a voracious reader and highly intelligent. And so I gave him a long list of books, and he called me back and said he loved With the Old Breed by Eugene Sledge, and a book called Helmet for My Pillow by Robert Leckie. And I was less than impressed by this, because everybody loves those books. They're really a starting point for somebody who's learning about this war. And he said, well, you know, what I love about it is they're so different. It's not just that one is in the first part of the war and one's in the second half of the war. It's that their personalities, the way they respond to the challenge is so different. And that's what part of what we got to get to here is move away from sort of cardboard cutouts to real individuals who are each so idiosyncratic in the way that they process all of this. And so I put him in touch with the Sledge family, and he called me back the next day thrilled, because he had found out that Eugene Sledge's best friend, a guy named Sid Phillips, had served in the same company as Robert Leckie. And this friendship then is the thread that connects the narrative of the miniseries and of the book. Because we don't have to spend a lot of time explaining things to you. We're following this friendship. Right? We're gonna see where these things take us. And what's great is that both of them serve in the 1st Marine Division. Sid and Leckie are on Guadalcanal and go to Australia and fight in Cape Gloucester, and then wind up in this place called Pavuvu that no one's ever heard of. And guess who shows up? Eugene Sledge. And Sid Phillips meets his old friend, his high school buddy. And I have to think that everything that Sid told Eugene was wrong. Sid is still with us, a wonderful guy to talk to, and he doesn't recall those conversations of 60 years ago, not surprisingly, but I kind of posit the idea that the war made sense to Sidney Phillips and to Robert Leckie, because they joined up to fight the Japanese in the wake of Pearl Harbor. They went to Guadalcanal. Some of the men, their friends, they lost in combat. Of course, for every one man they lost to shrapnel or bullets, they lost 5 to malaria and other jungle diseases. But they fought this battle against a fanatical enemy, and then they went to Australia, and they received the thanks of a grateful nation. The Australians were directly threatened by the onslaught of the Japanese imperial forces. And so Sidney Phillips and Robert Leckie, they have a sense of what this war was about. It was about protecting the Australians in a sort of basic way. And he meets Eugene Sledge and talks about the fact that they go and they take airfields and they hold on to the airfields and the Japanese attack, and of course then he goes home and Eugene Sledge then has to go on to Peleliu and Okinawa. And now it's the Marines' turn to charge the Japanese positions, and the war has changed. And as many of you know, and certainly the veterans here know, in the late half of the war, it doesn't make quite the same sense anymore because Japan can't win. So the fact that they're willing to lie there wounded and wait till an American gets close enough before they roll over and detonate a grenade to kill themselves and one more American doesn't make any sense. It's just the end of humanity. It's a war to the final shot. And these men, some of them sitting here with us tonight, were forced to shoot every body that they came across on the battlefield for self-defense. When you do that, you know you're winning the war. But as Sledge describes, you're also just losing little pieces of your humanity, of your peace of mind, of your belief in God. And the cost is so high that it just spurs this deep and bitter hatred of your enemy. And the casualty rates are going through the roof, and the hatred is going through the roof. And no one can understand what this peace could ever look like. What is the end of this war ever going to look like? Why won't these people surrender? It's over. When they land on Okinawa, it's completely surrounded by 15 fleet carriers and hundreds of support ships of the Fifth Fleet. There's no way that Japan is going to win. What are they doing? Why are they forcing us to do this? It's a terrible place to be. I had to add two characters that are not in the miniseries because I felt that there were little bits that a book could do that a miniseries didn't have room for. I added a character named Austin Schaffner because Austin serves in the Philippines in 1941. In fact, he was first stationed in Shanghai, China. And in November of 1941, a month before the Japanese attack, his unit is withdrawn from Shanghai, China. And I think it's absolutely essential that the readers know that, because too many books on World War II start out with the Japanese planes flying out of a clear blue sky over Pearl Harbor. Whereas my book starts off with U.S. forces engaged along the Pacific Rim. And that's important for a superpower to understand that while most of America thought they were isolationists that had nothing to do with world affairs in the 1930s, their forces were and quite aware that the Japanese and they were on a collision course and were preparing for it. Austin Schaffner's unit is pulled into the Philippines and they fight what is usually known as the Battle of Bataan. He's not actually on Bataan, he's on the little island just off the tip of it called Corregidor, which surrendered soon after Bataan. But that story of that debacle isn't just about MacArthur's failure as a commander of the United States' failure in its strategic policy. When you get to know Schaffner in the Philippines, you come to know why we had to win the war. What was going to happen to the people of the countries that Japan conquered? What were they going to do to those people? Well, spend some time with Austin Schaffner and you'll know why America had to win. and why people out there today still think of us as liberators.